Today's presentation will be recorded. I will now turn the presentation over to Ian and Chris. You may begin.
Good afternoon, everybody. We are about to start our third last Friday Lunch and Learn for SHRM Long Island. This is Chris Valentino. And we're going to jump right in. I guess since the last time we've done this, there has been so much going on. We have final rules with regard to exempt threshold. We have new information and new rules coming out, dealing with persuader activity on the labor front. So much always to talk about. But today, what we're going to be doing is really responding to a lot of the calls that we've been getting recently. Long Island employers calling up, wanting to pull together and implement active shooter policies, wanting to bolster workplace safety policies in light of not only the California issue, but other issues that have been getting, significant media attention. So to give you about, at this point, 19 minutes of information on this, what I've asked is Ian Bagatti to talk on the topic. Ian, as most of you know, does a lot of advice and counsel, does labor with me here out of the Long Island office, and also is our office OSHA expert. So Ian, take it away.
Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. And 19 minutes is more than I typically get when Chris starts talking. So hopefully we'll use that time, very well. Issues that we're seeing around the world today are really, driving a lot of phone calls to us concerning how do I protect my employees in the workplace. And San Bernardino is kind of the jump off for us, I think, with getting those kinds of calls and what is HR's role in these issues and, how do we go about it. But, we live in what appears to be somewhat dangerous times these days. And, with the attack in Brussels recently, it is imperative for us as employers to make sure we're doing everything that we can to safeguard our employees. And, workplace violence issues, they span a lot more than simply, a shooting incident or, a sexual assault in the workplace. I mean, it really runs the gamut from, obviously a sexual assault, but where you have disgruntled employees who get into an altercation with one another, you have a lot of issues to deal with. And what are we doing as employers to ensure that we're protecting our staff? So, just to give you a little bit from a statistical standpoint, OSHA states that about 2 million workers are impacted by workplace violence issues per year. That's an immense number. 2 million employees impacted by workplace violence. And I got to tell you, the more that I read reports and accountings of these workplace violence incidents, you can find in that fact pattern where there was an opportunity to intervene as an employer. And in most cases, I feel that these incidents are both foreseeable and preventable. So what I want to try to do today is give you a little bit of guidance on what you can look at, what you should be focusing on to try to head these things off before it gets into the situation where you have a horrible event like a shooting or something like that, God forbid. First off, there is an OSHA regulation on this, and it's called the General Duty Clause. It's Section 5A1 of the Occupational Safety and Health Act. OSHA has the right to cite you, to fine you as an employer for failing to protect your employees from workplace violence. It doesn't often do it, but you should know that it's out there. And OSHA fines can range all the way up per incident up to $70,000. So they can be significant. Obviously, that shouldn't be the motivating factor here. The human element is the one that we really have to be mindful of. So what is workplace violence, right? Obviously, we all know it's the physical assault, it's the shooting. That's clear. But OSHA takes the position that workplace violence, and is correct, is anytime where you have a person who is abused, threatened, intimidated, or assaulted in her or his employment. So it's obviously much broader. And some examples I've given you here, I think, are mostly obvious to everyone. Verbal abuse, written threats, threatening behavior by employees, and of course the physical attacks. Harassment in the workplace is also a workplace violence incident. So keep that stuff in mind as well. There are really four types of workplace violence. Really we're going to concern ourselves with number 3 here, but the first one deals with where you have an offender who has no relationship with the business whatsoever. So that's your robbery example. And OSHA does cite in these circumstances, if you're looking at convenience or liquor store employees, cash operations, 24-hour, grocery stores or things of that nature, OSHA will cite, because you have some type of notice that you're in somewhat of a dangerous industry, and you should be on the lookout. You should have precautions in place for those employees working in those industries. So that's the first type, is where the victim is a service provider and the offender is a person receiving services. And think about that really in like the medical professional, and a lot of our not-for-profit agencies that work with developmentally disabled consumers. You have an obligation to protect your staff from your consumers. The third one, again, which is the most important, is where the offender has a relationship with the business. That's the employee or the former employee or the customer who has an issue, is disgruntled, and does something to the workplace. And lastly, we have, and it gets its own category, victims of domestic violence, where the perpetrator doesn't have a direct relationship with the business, but has an indirect relationship with someone who works, at the company. So what are some warning signs? And I've given you a list here. Again, it's not meant to be, the be-all, end-all, but these are things that, as HR personnel, we should be on the lookout for, focused on, because these are the trigger points. These are the things when I go back and look at these reports and these case studies about workplace violence incidents, these are the things that, I think were avenues where we could have intervened that may have been able to stop an incident. You'd be surprised how often these workplace violence events, when you look at a shooting event, you go back in that person's file and you see that they had complained about, feeling discriminated in the workplace. And that incident of discrimination was investigated poorly by the employer, or that employer never got back to the employee with the results of their investigation. It's those things, it's those opportunities that the employer has, that us as HR personnel have, that we really need to seize, because the goal is to try to, again, avoid a situation that is manageable at the outset, but if we don't act at that point, it continues to brew within that employee, and it turns into a dangerous situation, and in worst case scenario, a shooting situation. So, again, the list is somewhat self-explanatory, but you can keep it, you can read it later on. I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the warning signs, what to be looking out for. Next, I wanted to also show you some of the traits of what are considered violent workers. And again, this was done via study. There are about 700 on average workplace homicides per year. So, they boiled down those statistics and looked for the demographics of those folks. And, if you have a workplace that's predominantly women, then you really have little to worry about, because most of these shooting events are always middle-aged white males. So, keep this stuff in mind as well when you try to do some analysis as to, are we at risk? Do we have certain risks? And lastly, before I give you, your homework, and really the important piece of this program, understand the business impact, and this is where you really need the buy-in from the top down. Workplace violence events, especially active shooter events, can destroy a business. There's no doubt. If you go and you ask employers who've had these issues, you have a tremendous turnover after a major workplace violence event occurs. You have employees who are no longer interested in coming to work. There obviously are lawsuits that follow that, and the average settlements, range from $500,000 to $3 million if cases go to trial. But there's a tremendous impact on employment. And I know I like to say it when I do wage and hour seminars, but I talk about how wage and hour is the kind of thing that can destroy a business. But this issue, workplace violence issues, especially active shooter, I think have a much more significant impact on your ability to continue on in employment. So let's talk about your homework. What do you guys need to do? And it really starts with a written anti-violence program. And I used to say this was an anti-violence policy, but it's really more than that. I went through, after San Bernardino, I went through kind of a few of the handbooks that I had sitting on my desk that clients were waiting for me to review, and I just took a quick spin through them to see if there were workplace violence policies. And a lot of them had a basic policy that says, workplace violence is bad and we're going to discipline you if you engage in workplace violence. But what I found to be surprising is none of those policies prohibited people from bringing weapons to the workplace. Luckily, this is New York, and you have that ability. So step number one is you got to go back and you got to look at your anti-violence program and really see what it says. Are you prohibiting the right things? Are you ensuring that employees are not bringing weapons to the workplace? And you have that right to do that in New York. In some other states, unfortunately, you don't have that right. But if rural New York employers seize that right, prohibit employees from bringing weapons to the workplace. The next step is make sure that policy covers every type of workplace violence event, as well as the type of victims. So not just workers, but your customers, your visitors, your clients, your patients. So ensure that you have a very well-drafted, and it should be over a page, frankly, discussing workplace violence, retaliation, things of that nature. The next, and I think one of the most important things, is creating a facility security plan. And I think this applies to any size employer. I don't think it matters whether you have 20 employees or you have 2,000 employees. We are all too comfortable with allowing people to access our workplaces. I know Jackson Lewis, frankly, is a little too comfortable. You should make sure that visitors have to sign in. You should make sure that identification is being provided. It's a good practice to require employees to display some type of identification badge as they walk through the facility. Big problem if you're working in a building with multiple employers is the piggybacking response, which is when an employee will access their swipe card to get into some type of elevator or secure area, and another individual will piggyback, follow them through. Those are the types of things that are very easily avoided with a good policy in place and good communication with security personnel or your building security to make sure that you have those bases covered. You should all have emergency response plans. What to do in the case of an emergency, and it's not just the case of a shooting emergency. I'm sure we all have a fire emergency plan, but what do you do if there's a situation where there's an incidence of workplace violence? What are employees supposed to do? Where are they supposed to go? Consider not having employees report to one location in the case of an emergency situation, because if you do have a shooting event, then what's the easiest way to get everybody in one place? I'll just pull the fire alarm. We all report to a particular spot in the parking lot, and I'm going to go there and I'm going to cause some damage. I can get everybody in one shot. So these are the types of things in this world we need to start thinking about and changing the way we do things. Other things to consider, and I think they're basic, but they're important. A complaint resolution procedure we all, I'm sure, have. But what do we do with regard to acts or threats of violence when it deals with a supervisor or a manager? Who's going to take that report? What are we going to do with that report? Again, a lot of problems that employers find themselves in is when there are these trigger points. There are these situations that, if we're really paying attention, we should be able to foresee a potential issue with an employee, and the complaint doesn't get articulated to the right people, or it doesn't get investigated after the fact. We have to make sure that if employees hear something, they say something, and a lot of times employees don't do that. They don't report those trigger points. I know that a lot of times, if something is said in the workplace and it's something that's somewhat controversial, I always think it's a joke, right? But when it comes to workplace violence and it comes to like suicide conversations, we have to take the position that it's never a joke. Even if we think that person is joking, we have to make sure our employees know they've got to report that to somebody, because if they don't, and it turns into a workplace shooter type event, we're going to look back on that and we're going to say, we had an opportunity to cut this off before it got this bad, and we missed that opportunity because our employees didn't know what to do. They didn't know who to complain to, and they didn't know how important it was to make that complaint. So very important that not only do we need the supervisory policies as to what to do, but we need the policies for our employees as well, so they understand what their obligations are to try to avoid these situations from occurring. Next, go through your investigation procedures. Make sure, again, there's a detailed plan in place as to who's going to be responsible when there's an investigation for a complaint of violence in the workplace. Pretty obvious stuff, but if you actually go through your policy, you'll see workplace violence is not one of the things you typically identify in your investigation procedures. So again, it's all about getting involved with these incidents before they become, newsworthy, before that they make the paper because of a terrible event that has happened. Next, and I think probably the most important, is developing and conducting workplace safety training. Hopefully we all do our EEO training on an annual basis or so. It's really smart to incorporate a workplace safety piece in your EEO training. Take an extra half an hour, part of that training, and really discuss with employees, one, what we just talked about, their obligations to advise each HR or whoever you're going to designate of concerns that they have with regard to their coworkers and situations in the workplace. So that's number one. The second is ensure that we have a policy as to, God forbid something happens in this workplace, what are we all going to do? What's your job going to be? Are we going to, and the most common, you see I put in here, RHF, that's the run, hide, fight scenario. Is that going to be your, your mantra for your employees? How are you going to communicate to employees if there's an incident in the workplace? They need to understand all of these mechanisms, because when an emergency situation like this occurs, everybody's in a panic. And no one's going to be able to think clearly at that point unless you've done the training, unless you've ingrained it in them that if we have this situation, there's going to be a text alert that goes out to all our employees. Here are the code words that we're going to use. If we want you to flee the building, we're going to use the word flee. If we want you to lock down, which means, get under your desk, we're going to use the word lock down. You have to describe all of this so that employees know what to do if these emergency situations occur. We can't wait till they happen. If we wait till they happen, again, everybody's running around screaming, and there's going to be, we're not going to limit the damage. And it's our job as employers to limit the damage and to do the best that we can for our employees. But the training is really the most important piece of this. The policy is great. If we all develop policies, that's a good start. But the policies have to be living and breathing. And the only way they're going to be living and breathing is if we train employees on them so that they know what to do when these situations arise. And lastly, I think it's a very good thing to test your policies and to test your procedures. And the best way to do that is a tabletop exercise. And a tabletop exercise on active shooter is really meant for your senior management, your HR, and your security personnel. And what we typically do is we run through a scenario from day one to the actual day of a shooting event, which can be over a period of months. And we take your policies and your procedures and we role play the situation so that we find where your policies have some weaknesses. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? It's those avenues that will give us a sense of, okay, this is working for us, this is where we fell short, and we can then fix it so that, again, God forbid that we have one of these situations, we're prepared for it and we're protecting our employees. For us, that's the goal in these particular situations, the protection of our employees and ourselves. And the only way we're going to do that is if we really embrace this, we get our written documents in place, and then we train our employees on those documents. And obviously, we're happy to help in any way that we can with this stuff. Just let us know.
Sure. It's all great stuff. And just for everybody on the phone, what we always do at the breakfast series, what we always do at the dinner meetings or wherever else we meet and we talk about HR issues, is we always come back to the same preventive strategy. And it's about treating your employees as your greatest asset. And my ultimate hope, and everybody who's on this webinar, everybody's hope that we never have this on Long Island, and we certainly never have it at one of our places of business. Having this is important from two aspects. Number one, God forbid something happens, people are prepared. But almost equally as important, having these types of policies and talking about this stuff, it allows your employees to have the belief that my employer is on top of its game, that I am an asset, that I am more than just a means. This is more than a paycheck. And when your employees feel that way about you as an entity, when they can look in their handbook and see a policy that's to protect them, when you're taking the time, 15 minutes out every year, to talk to them about safety procedures, you are creating a we mentality as opposed to an us versus them mentality, and that helps you avoid harassment claims, it helps you avoid discrimination claims, retaliation, labor unions. It is very, very helpful, and that's only the legal stuff. Practically, it's the right thing to do. So take this very seriously. Consider if you don't have this in your handbook and in your training protocols, and if you do, let's move in the direction of maybe reviewing them and bolstering them a little bit. Have a great spring weekend for everybody on the phone. If you're celebrating, have a lovely holiday this weekend, and we will see you next month. Thanks.